Hey, how's it going? Mike from LI Flies Mike, and as always, the full list of materials will be down in the description below. Today we're going to be using the Gamakatsu Sl12S 2-odd. Now originally I used to tie these in 3-odds. I actually recommend probably bumping this up to the size 4-odd or scaling down the size a little bit, but traditionally I used to tie these on mustads, but we're going to use the Gamakatsu today. Now we're going to get started off by tying a flatwing tail. Now this fly is kind of a mixture of a flatwing, a bucktail deceiver, and using some Senno's laser dub. It's one of my only quote-unquote original flies, the Mullet Marauder. But getting started off here, we're going to use some bucktail and then just tying the feathers in flat. Traditionally I would tie 3 feathers, but we're going to go with 5 today. So we're going to just tie some white saddle hackle starting off and just tie these in flat. You can use Chinese saddle hackle, or if you have flatwing hackle, you can go ahead and use that as well. Most important thing is that the hackle lays nice and flat and they're somewhat tapered down and thin. So then we're going to go ahead and take some Flashabou here. This is kind of a classic flash to work with flatwing tails Kenny Abrams used to use. And just take a couple pieces and loop this and tie this in here. And then we can go ahead and take some chartreuse hackle. This is some thin chartreuse, bright chartreuse hackle. And I'm going to tie this to where it's slightly longer than the white hackle. This will probably be the longest hackle we tie in. Now I have this Ewan patch I got on sale for like 15 bucks or so, or 20 bucks from Lure Parts Online quite a while ago. I've been meaning to use it. It's a little bit of a darker color. It's going to match our Senno's laser dub. So we're going to go ahead and tie this on top of the chartreuse feather, following it up with a grizzly hackle here. And this is going to give us the nice kind of striped and barred appearance that you see in certain mullet species. You don't have to use this color combination. You can always tie this fly in whatever colors you'd like, but chartreuse and white is a classic color. I also tie these in gray and white, tan and white, olive and white, and all white, black and purple, colors like that. Now just to add a little bit more pizzazz to the fly here, we're going to tie in a little bit of yellow or olive Flashabou to give it some color, and then follow it up by some pearl or gray ghost crystal flash. You can just use whatever sort of flash you like. I just prefer these 2 types of flash. I use them the most. Something I've been doing on a lot of flies recently after tying the Johnny Cane's Kinky Mother is using super glue pretty much between each tie here, applying a small amount and then just spreading it around over our thread. I'm going to go ahead and do that here, and then a nice transition point for the fly that we can do is we can go ahead and take a pretty small amount. We don't want too much, but just enough to create a nice transition between the bucktail. We're going to take some Marabou here and using some white for the belly and some chartreuse for the top. You can go ahead and just cut some of this off of the quill and tie this on here. Great thing about Marabou is it's so soft and wispy, it's going to add a ton of movement to the fly as well as the flatwing hackle. Something I tend to do a lot is add a little bit more to the belly when it comes to white. I don't know why, maybe it's just hard for me to determine between the colors. So you can always go ahead and just pluck a little bit of the Marabou away if you end up tying a little too much on top or bottom, like you can see I'm doing here. Just go ahead and do it from the inside so you don't see it with the Marabou that was tied on the outside. So like I said, this fly is essentially a mix of a couple different flies, a flatwing and a bucktail deceiver. So we're going to go ahead and do some bucktail collars here. And we want these bucktail collars, the first collar that is, to be about 2/3 of the length of the fly. We want that flatwing tail to really have enough room to breathe and move around and have as much action as possible. So just go ahead, and again, less is more a lot of times with this bucktail, so I'm going to use a pretty sparse amount here. This is what I was talking about. We used to use the Mustad 370 SD big game hook, but they discontinued that and they changed it to a lighter wire hook. So I think if you're going to tie this, I'd probably up it to a 4-odd Gamakatsu Sl12S or an appropriately sized Ahrex hook, for instance, or just potentially scale down the size ever so slightly with this 2-odd. Adding a lead keel is always an option as well, but having the hook be the majority of the weight, not having to add a lead keel, is always a nice option. Always the preferred option, that is. So moving forward here and just tying another bucktail collar. This is classic bucktail deceiver style here. Just slightly tapering down the length of the material, so that way we have a nice taper to the body of the fly. Now if you're using a longer hook, for instance, or tying a larger version of this fly, you may need to add more collars. Here I generally just use about 2 collars. On the 4-odd, maybe I would add 3 because we have more length to the shank of the hook. The idea is just scaling down the length of the bucktail as you move forward. And now here's kind of what separates the fly apart. And this is taking some Sl12S laser dub. Now this is a material that's used a lot in tying trout flies and nymphs and steelhead flies like that, but it's a great material specifically for building a head on a fly. We've covered this in the synthetic fly tying video. If you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend checking it out, because we cover pretty much almost every synthetic material that's pretty relevant on the market. And we talk about most synthetics, including this one, in depth, so I highly recommend checking it out. But essentially all we're going to do here is tie this on 60-40 style, where about 60% of the material lengthwise is facing off the back of the fly, and about 40% of the material is facing off the front of the fly. This gives us a nice taper to the material, and all we're going to do is essentially fold this back like a hollow tie, if you will, and weave our thread through, and then we're going to have a nice bait fish head to the front of the fly. You need to be careful. You don't want to add too much of this material because it can add up pretty quick. This is where going with a larger hook, for instance, definitely helps. Substantially larger than the size of the fly, or at least adding a lead keel, because you are adding some of this synthetic material which can be somewhat buoyant. Now a little trick here before taking the material and folding it back is actually taking our bodkin and applying a small amount of super glue. Now if you have a very fine tip super glue applicator, then you can use that, but using the bodkin is a little trick. We can use the fine point of the bodkin to actually apply the super glue so it doesn't make a mess. This just makes the fly a little bit more durable. Also makes the Sl12S laser dub head a little bit more defined. You can kind of make sure that the material is not going to be too puffy or exaggerated, if you will. But overall, just make the fly more durable, which is important. And pulling the material back nice and taut, you can then wrap a very small thread head here. Again, we don't want to build a big thread dam with this fly, kind of like the Johnny Kins Kinky Muddler. Minimal thread wrapping in front is all you really need. The main thing is just applying enough thread pressure and then applying some head cement after. So as usual with our synthetic flies, anytime we tie with synthetic materials and naturals as well, taking a fine wire dog brush. I've had this brush for about 20 years and you've seen me use it so many times on the channel. It's a one-time purchase that really helps out with fly tying situations like this. Just brushing out the material, making certain that it's not wrapping on top of itself. It helps at times, especially with synthetics. Even on a boat or taking this out fishing with you can help. So now just to finish off the fly here, we're going to take some 3D eyes and some E6000 and just apply a pretty healthy amount of E6000 to the backside of the eye. We can apply some of that E6000 to where we want it, then push the eye down and push it back and not make too much of a mess. You've seen me do this many times with the E6000 or the Loctite liquid seal, for instance, using 3D eyes. So it's a little trick to not making too much of a mess, because the glue has a tendency to squeeze out and get all over the place. So there we go, there's the Mullet Marauder. Now one thing that this is how I used to finish the fly, just like this, but one thing that we found with 3D eyes and making them more durable is something I'm just doing off camera and letting it sit overnight, is applying some liquid fusion to the fly. And what this will do is just a small amount of liquid fusion on top of the eyes, spread it around to the base of the eyes, and a little bit on the thread wrapping. It's just going to make the eyes that much more durable and they're less likely to fall off over time. You can see one of the reasons why I designed this fly this way. And again, I'm not claiming this is, I'm sure there were flies that were like this in the past. We've talked about this before. I try not to design too many quote-unquote original flies, but the flatwing tail has a ton of action from the Kenny Abrams flatwing. The sparse bucktail collars help us build a profile on the fly without adding too much weight or material to the fly from the Popovic's bucktail deceiver. And just some Sl12S laser dub on the head gives us the nice big head on the fly, causing that water to flow over it and then hitting that bucktail and flatwing hackle tail, giving us all that action. It's a very simple fly, one we covered years ago on the channel, but I figured it was time to update it with some 4K footage and with some better narration as well. Well, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to everyone, all our new subscribers here and all of our Twitch subs and YouTube members. The support means a lot. You not only get access to some emos and whatnot, but you get early access to our videos as well. We have new fly tying and fly fishing content coming out every week. We have live fly tying on Friday nights and early access for members. Well, thank you so much again for watching. Appreciate it. And have a great start of your season out there this year. as April's about a month away and striper season's coming up at any moment now. My name is Mike from LI Flies Mike. Well, thank you so much for watching. Till next time, tight lines.